Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey everybody, it's Jared. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. I am here today with a man, the myth, the legend, Randy Sutton. He's down in Las Vegas, so thoroughly enjoying the nice weather he has down there, while the rest of us are still freezing and trying to wait for spring. But Randy is just an amazing guy. I've done a ton of reading on him. And most importantly, though, some of his, the people that he serves with on his, I think it's a nonprofit, right, Randy?
It is.
Wounded Blue?
Wounded Blue is a nonprofit, yes.
Yes, I figured it was. I wanted to make sure. The Wounded Blue is an organization we're going to talk about a lot today, but I have interviewed several of his board members, including Betsy Brantner Smith, who is just amazing. And a few others. And I just, Randy, it's awesome to have you on the show. Welcome, and can't say thanks enough for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I did almost have to put a jacket on today, almost.
Almost. Well, yeah, we'll leave it at that. We all have our different tolerances here. So, well, Randy, let's talk about you for a second here. You started in New Jersey, and then you ended up in Las Vegas with the Las Vegas Metro PD. Okay.
Right. So I spent for my first 10 years as a cop in Princeton. It was my hometown, and I always knew that I was going to be a police officer, and I was very fortunate that I got hired at a very young age. I was hired at 19 years old, and it was interesting because they had just changed the age of majority from 21 to 18. So you could drink and you could vote and you could be a cop. But what you couldn't do is you couldn't buy ammunition because you had to be 21. So I'm getting ready to go into the New Jersey State Police Academy, a very tough academy. And I had to have my mom go buy my bullets for me. And it was that little bit of humiliation was perfectly what I needed at that stage in my life. And began my police career there. Was a patrol officer for 6 years. Detective for 4, but it was a small town department, Princeton, where the university is, a lot of college stuff, but not a lot of real crime. And so I was bored, a 32-man police department, and decided even though I was halfway to retirement, I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I began my career all over again. I came out to Las Vegas on the recommendation of some FBI agents who told me what a great department it was, and came out here, had to go through the academy all over again. Had to start my career as a patrol officer again. And I never looked back on that decision, though, Jared, because it literally, it gave me everything that I was looking for and a little bit that I wasn't looking for.
Well, as we were discussing before we came on, I lived 4 years in Las Vegas and still have a bunch of friends there, and go through there all the time. It's changed over the years. It's always had that a little bit of an element of, the underlying casino and mob type of element, but it's grown so much that with pretty much every major city, it's got its issues.
Yeah, this is a very challenging but entertaining place to be a cop because you get everything here. Well, let me put it this way. So I came here looking for action, right?
Right.
So I get out of the police academy. I'm in my field training. I finally get done with that, and I'm in my first assignment as a patrol officer. And it was a pretty rough part of town. It was a lot of gang infested areas, and I get involved in a pursuit with a stolen vehicle. And it's the only area in town where we actually rode 2-man cars at the time. So we chase this car. It's 2:00 in the morning. They crash. I run after the driver. My partner goes after the passenger. And I'm right on this guy's butt. I can't quite catch him. I was a lot younger then, and had my weapon in my hand. And he goes around the corner of a house, housing development in a low income housing development, and I come around the corner and he's there waiting for me to ambush me, and he's pointing the gun at me as I come around the corner, and I instinctively pegged a shot at him, and it zinged right by his ear, and it hit the building behind him, and a piece of stucco broke off and hit him in the head, and he thought he was shot. So he couldn't throw that gun down and surrender fast enough, and got him cuffed up and found that he was 15 years old. And at that point, I realized, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. You're in the real deal now. And when a 15-year-old is willing to ambush you and kill you over a stolen car, you know that you are now in the mix. And so that was a real wake-up call for me, and was only one of many, many armed encounters I had in the ensuing years.
Yeah, and that was a little while ago, right?
That was 1986.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, things have changed since 1986. It's crazy. I was there in the early 2000s, and even then it was the whole bowl was almost completely built out. And every time I go back down there now, especially for like, Chia and different conferences, it's like it's hard to recognize. So yeah, I think it's sad that over the last few decades, really, the amount of respect really for law enforcement and for, just figures of authority in general is just, it's almost gone. And especially the young kids, they just don't get taught how to respect, authority, how to respect law enforcement, how to respect even doctors and nurses. It's, I don't know. It's hard to imagine society getting better as a whole. It just seems like it's more of it's just dividing more and more. And that's not necessarily on ideological grounds, but more just on the people that are willing to, follow the rule of law and the people that aren't. And I just don't know that, we can coincide too much longer.
Well, one thing for sure, the world of law enforcement has changed so radically during my tenure as a police officer. And even though I don't actively serve as a cop anymore, I'm still very much in the mix. I mean, I deal in law enforcement as a trainer, as a mentor, as a commentator on all kinds of news outlets. I have a book that's coming out in about a month called Rescuing 911, The Fight for America's Safety, that talks about just this very topic. And I can pinpoint it. I can tell you right where the anti-law enforcement changes began. It was under the Obama administration. And we saw the President of the United States, President Obama, actively condemn law enforcement, treat us with disrespect. And when the President of the United States treats the police with disrespect, what does that tell the constituency? What does that tell the people? And that began it. That began the downfall of public respect for law enforcement, and then it increased exponentially after the George Floyd insanity and Michael Brown insanity. So there's the trajectory has been downward. We saw so much lawfare as well being directed against law enforcement by the Department of Justice under both Obama and Biden, that it was frightening to become a police officer. And of course, now we're bearing the fruit of that in the crisis of recruitment retention. And so, this is going to be a generational issue, Jared. This isn't going to turn around overnight. It's going to take a generation to restore respect, restore dignity in law enforcement, and so that's really a critical component of where we need to go today.
Oh yeah. Eric Holder, I think, is one of the most evil dudes that has ever occupied the office of Attorney General. And yeah, Obama started it because he chose Eric Holder, but he chose him for a reason. And I think Eric Holder, he served under Clinton, if I remember. So that was back in the the 90s when it really started infesting the Department of Justice. But I think you're right. I think the whole reason that they started launching all these investigations against different law enforcement agencies that would have any kind of an incident like George Floyd or something, it wasn't good enough to just investigate the actual incident. They would then start looking at this whole systemic, they started looking at the entire agency and all the decisions that they've made and their hiring practices. And, if anything was ever, against a certain, or even had the appearance of against a certain race, then they would just hammer, and then they'd throw in all these different things like, hiring practices and things that, so yeah, I think you're right about, when Obama first started things, that was kind of what keyed it off. So, well, Randy, let's get into your, before we get too deep into, the whole 80s and 90s and 2000s, the political ramifications of all that. Let's get into the Wounded Blue. So, clearly after your, having served so many years, what inspired you to start the Wounded Blue?
Well, there's a succession of events that took place, and they go back to my career when I was still active, and I had some life-changing events that took place that created the trajectory. You wouldn't, sometimes you can plan your life and you think that the direction it's going to go, and then events take place which completely upend what your thoughts, your plans were going to be. And so I have to go back to a couple of very significant events, and one was a gunfight that I was in a long time ago that I, by all rights, should not have survived. I was in a gunfight with an active shooter, and literally our gun muzzles were touching at the time that we opened fire on each other, and I wasn't wearing any body armor at the time.
Wow.
And I fired 2 rounds, and then my gun jammed in the middle of the gunfight. And it was surreal. It was surreal. And somehow none of his bullets hit me. He fired and fired and fired, and eventually, he died. I did not. And it was such a significant moment for me that it literally changed the way I viewed policing, the way I viewed life.
And now, is this in Vegas, or is this in
this
Princeton?
in Vegas? Oh yeah, this in Vegas. And it was my first fatal gunfight, not my last, but my first.
Okay.
And that significance of surviving that changed the way I viewed life. I call it. It gave me the journey of why. Why didn't I die that night? And I believe that I didn't die that night because I hadn't completed whatever mission I was put on earth to do. Without being deeply religious or spiritual, that's my belief. And so that, of course, gives you the question, okay, then, what's your mission? And I believe that my mission was to affect the lives of those I respect most in this world, and that's the American law enforcement officer. So I began teaching. I began, creating my books. I as much influence as I could have as a police officer. That was my trajectory. And I was on the TV show Cops. I'm one of the most featured officers on the show. written the books, been in movies like Casino and Fools Rush In, instructed cops around the country in a topic called policing with honor for many years. And I'm a police instructor. So this has gone on for decades. So how did the Wounded Blue come to be? I did not intend to retire when I did. I suffered a stroke in my police car, and it ended my police career. It was the most frightening moment of my life. On patrol, had a young officer with me. I was a lieutenant on graveyard shift, driving down Las Vegas Boulevard, and I suffered a stroke. I literally felt my brain slowing down. And I stopped the police car. I said, "Get me medical. I'm having a stroke." And this poor kid's looking at me like, "Really?" You know? So I got out of the car and started speaking gibberish. Couldn't control it. And then I lost the ability to move and speak altogether and crumpled to the pavement and lay there helpless. And while I'm laying there in the gutter, tourists are walking by me taking my picture. And luckily, that same angel that's been on my shoulder my entire career was with me again. The clot went through my brain, did some damage, but certainly could have been a whole lot worse. Could have killed me, could have, completely paralyzed me. It didn't. And so, but it ended my police career. And 3 weeks before that, my mother died in my arms. 2 months before that, I was in another fatal gunfight. And there was a lot going on. But they discovered that I had a severe heart condition, which is what led to my stroke. So suddenly I find myself without my job, without my family. It was a very difficult time. And then what happened next was debilitating. That is that my own department turned its back on me and said, "We're not paying your medical bills. We're not giving you your benefits." And I was, "Wait a minute, you have to, it's the law." And they said, "Well, make us." Had to get a lawyer, had to fight him for over a year. They lost every single hearing, and yet they continued to spend thousands of taxpayers' dollars fighting me, knowing that legally they had to pay my medical bills. They had to give me my benefits. So I'm trying to figure out why are they doing this? I even went to go see the sheriff who I worked with for 24 years. And I said, "How do you treat me like this?" And he said, "Randy, this isn't personal. It's just business."
Just very personal to you.
Well, I came to find out he was telling me the truth. It wasn't personal. See, they knew they had to pay me. They knew they had to pay the medical bills legally. But they also knew that the appeals process is rigged in their favor.
Yeah.
And it would take well over a year to go through the process. So they were hoping I would die in the meantime. And that's a bitter pill to swallow, especially when, you spend your whole adult life as a cop, almost on more than one occasion, at death's door, literally. So
yeah.
It was a very debilitating time. I won. They paid my medical bills. They did what they had to do by law. But it was a very dark time for me. I felt completely isolated. I felt completely alone. Nobody was helping me. And I had nobody to turn to. So then, in the way that the world works, cops started reaching out to me from this. Facebook was starting to become a big thing. And Randy, I know you don't know me, but I've seen you and read your books, etc. But I've been shot in the line of duty, and my chief never even visited me in the hospital. They're not paying my medical bills. Randy, I was paralyzed, and my patrol car was hit by a drunk driver. They've thrown me away from all over the country. And every one of them said the same thing. I feel abandoned. I feel alone. And I realized that this is a national issue. And there was no national resource. We just needed to know that we weren't alone. And so I created the Wounded Blue because of that. And our motto is never forgotten, never alone. And we've helped thousands of police officers across this country. My entire team is made up of cops who've been shot, stabbed, beaten, run over, screwed up and screwed over. And we provide peer support. We help people get into treatment for addiction, because that's a big, big deal. Post-traumatic stress we deal with all the time. We have an incredible conference once a year called the National Law Enforcement Survival Summit, which will be in September. Life-changing stuff, life-affirming. I've had cops stand up at this conference say, if it weren't for this conference, I was going to kill myself.
Wow.
We saved 2 lives this week from suicide. So what we do is very, very powerful. And it's I believe it was the mission that I was put here to create.
Well, I almost get chills just when you're telling that story because you know, I'm not law enforcement, but I'm military, and you know, there's just millions of stories of guys that have been in the military that I think parallels a lot of the stories that
Yes,
happen in law enforcement.
100%.
And it's you know, the feeling of abandonment. And in fact, I just saw a video, you know, before we came on of a guy that was got pulled over, and a cop walks up to the passenger side of his truck, and he's talking to him, and he says, you know, hey, because he was on the phone and he's crying. He's on, I'm on the suicide line with the, you know, the VA. And, you know, the cop said, hey, you know, immediately started talking to him. And I just think that there's an unspoken camaraderie there, that, and an understanding that cops and military have, both serve the country, serve the population, and yet are very underappreciated. And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
you're 100% right.
absolutely fantastic that that you're starting this. So, or that you started it, and it's how many members do you have now? What's how does it survive? I'm assuming you know, being a nonprofit, you guys
It
just take
survives by me begging for money. That's how it survives.
well.
We're completely hello, sweetheart. We're completely funded by charity dollars.
Okay.
And you know, raising money is not an easy thing.
No.
You know, I don't like asking for money, but I have to. It's part of, you know, if we're going to keep the doors open. And by the way, I don't take a salary. I live on my pension.
Hmm.
I have one salaried employee who is our executive director, who is a retired sheriff, doing an amazing job, and he's the only person that actually gets paid, because it's a full-time job and we're doing full-time work. Everybody else on my team's a volunteer, which is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
we have guys that I mean, it can be very time consuming to be a peer counselor. It's morally uplifting to know that you're helping, to know that you can actually play a role that can save a life, save a career, save a marriage. And so we're very proactive in looking for people that need our help. One of the questions, or not one of the questions, one of the issues is even getting the word out there that we exist, because law enforcement is so disjointed.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one particular area that gets the attention of all the cops. So that's a constant battle, is letting people know we exist.
Yeah.
I've had police officers walk up to us at National Police Week, where we have a display set up at Tent City, and say, who are you guys? And once we tell them, I've actually had them start crying right there. We've gotten people into treatment at these conferences where they finally know we exist.
Yeah. No, that doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, you know, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, is because, you know, we talk about law enforcement, we talk about, you know, all these kind of, you know, great stories of chasing down bad guys and stuff like that. But just like I said, just like the military, it's, people don't realize that most of law enforcement and most of military isn't, you know, going through these huge mud puddles in a tank and all these exciting things jumping out of the airplane.
Right.
99% of your time is spent preparing for those moments. And,
Yeah. Yep.
all of the training and all of the, sitting in a car, observing, a closed door, being on patrol, all that kind of stuff that you guys do. Um, that's the 99% that, you're spending. And there's a lot of time to think. There's a lot of time to contemplate what you're doing, your career choices, your life choices. And, after sacrificing and doing everything that you guys do, then to have that feeling of abandonment, if that's what happens, at the end of your career, um, being able to go to an organization like you guys is just absolutely incredible. And so I applaud you. And I'm excited that I have a small, moment here to help everybody, help get the word out. So definitely for those that are listening, if you have a chance, go to thewoundedblue.org right now and donate, because I know there's more people out there that you can help, Randy. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I love, some of the stories that you've been telling. So we will definitely post that in the show notes, the link to your organization. And
Great. Mhm.
yeah.
And if there's an officer out there or retired cop, because retired cops, they bring all that baggage with them, believe me.
Mhm.
That the trauma doesn't end when you turn in your badge. So we are literally a resource for every cop in America, retired cop, and we also do spousal support too.
Mm.
So we're very responsive. And if somebody's in trouble, in jeopardy, you can contact our phone number. We have somebody manning it 24/7. And if you want to reach me personally, I'm Randy at thewoundedblue.org. Reach out to me. I'll get you hooked up with somebody. If you want to be a sponsor of the Wounded Blue, if you're a company and you want to be a sponsor, contact me personally, Randy at thewoundedblue.org.
Yeah, absolutely. I dare say, Randy, the day that I had the most stress as far as the military goes was the day I turned in my retirement paperwork.
Yeah.
So I'll
Yeah.
bet the day that you actually put that badge and your gun, your service weapon down on your captain's desk, uh, that has to be just such a feeling. It's almost like you're putting away and you're giving away part of your identity. And I can't imagine, well, I can imagine, but
Yeah.
I've
Well,
never,
think of this. I didn't plan to retire.
yeah,
And it was taken from me, right? It was my career was taken from me by the stroke.
yeah,
So it wasn't something that I had any say over. And that was part of it. If I
yeah,
could have controlled that time and I could have chosen the moment when it's time for me to leave, that would have been one thing. But it was just literally ripped out from under me. And it was, okay, Randy, you're done.
yeah. Well, now you got to figure out, like
What
you
do I want
said,
to be when I grow up?
yeah, got to, got to, reassess what God has in store for you. So,
Well, think of it this way. I look at it very objectively that if it had not been for the stroke, which I thought was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, my trajectory in life would never have created the Wounded Blue.
mm,
So I think that, I live by a certain philosophy, and that is that you can't create your destiny, but you can control your legacy.
mm,
And that legacy is what I have chosen. And the destiny part was handed to me when I had that stroke.
yeah. Well, I 100% believe that, your ability to be remembered in this life is going to be based on the number of people that you serve, the number of people that you help. It's not going to be based on where you live and what you drive and all that kind of stuff, because that's
Right.
just going to go away. It's like within uh, days of your funeral, all that stuff is somebody else is going to own it. And
Right.
but the people that you serve, the people that you love, the people that you help in the life, that's how your legacy is going to keep going. So there were some posts, especially on LinkedIn, that you had made.
Are you talking about the ones where I start them off with America needs to know?
Yeah, where are those?
So yeah, I post they're basically announcements of police officers who've been murdered in the line of duty. And I start them off with America needs to know, because America does need to know about the service and sacrifice of these men and women who are
Yeah,
being murdered in the line of duty. Literally, almost daily, a police officer is shot, which is mind-boggling. Almost every single day, a cop is shot.
yeah,
And we had 2 days in which 4 officers were murdered in 2 days. So America needs to know. And so I do those little videos, and I put them out on my social media and the Wounded Blue social media. So, I urge, if you guys are on Facebook, go to the Wounded Blue page on Facebook and like it and follow us. My personal, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on what's that other stuff called? I'm not a big social media guy, but I post some stuff on Facebook and Instagram. But I urge you to follow us on the Facebook page, so you see what the Wounded Blue is up to, what we're doing, announcements, and also I have a podcast called The Cop's Life, and I'm very proud of that podcast. It's named after my best-selling book called The Cop's Life.
okay,
And it's amazing interviews with people who have been through it, and from all kinds of different walks of life, but law enforcement related. And it's very inspirational stuff. And and then my new book is coming out, so we'll be announcing that soon too. That'll be on the website.
nice.
And
All right.
that's Rescuing 911: The Fight for America's Safety.
Well, I consider me the first one that's going to order one of those. I want to read it.
And I want you to review it too. Put it on Amazon. Got to do
Okay,
it.
absolutely, absolutely. So let's go over some of these. Jason Roscoe from North Las Vegas PD
Ah,
on February 4th. What can you tell us about him?
terrible. Responded to a disturbance call, a guy throwing rocks at cars. And when he got there, the subject was armed. He basically walked into an ambush. And while and they got in a gunfight, he was caught out in the open. He was hit, went down, and even though he returned fire and hit the suspect, a second officer, a backup officer, is the one who killed him, but he was mortally wounded. And despite those mortal wounds, he managed to fight back. And the suspect walked up to him when he was down and killed him and executed him. 2 children. I was actually I do a lot of media newscasting on law enforcement topics, and I covered his funeral for 3.5 hours. And it's just one of my jobs with Metro. I was assistant commander of the Honor Guard, so I buried a lot of friends, and for me it's a very personal. Even though I didn't know the officer,
Yeah.
he's still part of my family.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so it was very difficult to cover his funeral, only because I've been involved in so many, and actually that funerals are one of my major triggers for my post-traumatic stress. and it's very difficult to get through that. So when I see these officers getting killed, and I feel it's my duty to bring it to the attention of the American people, and America needs to know.
Well, they do. And I think, especially now, it's incredible how much more common, these officer shootings are nowadays compared to what they used to be. And I think this stems back to what we were originally talking about.
Yeah.
The war on cops is real. And there is a certain segment of society that, well, there's two problems with this. There's a segment of society that I believe legitimately want to end all law enforcement. There's, and it ranges everywhere from politicians that talk about defunding the police all the way to the people that, like this guy that actually pulled the trigger. It's difficult for, I think, 99% of society to understand the brutal mentality that it takes to walk up to another human being and just point a gun at him and pull the trigger. And, it doesn't matter what person that is, but then to do it to a cop, a person that is hired and assigned to protect the rest of the community. What you're doing is not only killing a person, but you're also trying to destroy a part of society. And the mentality that I like I said, I'm not even sure I can understand it. And maybe you tell me, can cops even understand that mentality?
Well, there's been such a dehumanizing effort on the part of media, politicians, groups like Black Lives Matter and other leftist radical organizations that have been very effective in manipulating thought. And then there's this problem with a lack of fear. I actually wrote an article because police agencies, they want to be softer. All the politicians, the chiefs, they're going, we have to be a softer approach. Well, there needs to be fear. You need to be afraid to put your hands on me as a cop.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be afraid of the consequences. And they have destroyed a lot of that fear because of the way that law enforcement is now being trained to avoid, anything that looks bad. So cops are more fearful now to use the proper amount of force at the appropriate times than ever in history. That's getting cops killed. That's getting cops killed and injured.
Yeah.
Because they are afraid to use. There should be a lot more people getting killed by the cops. Now, that's a harsh thing to say, but that's the reality. And when I see, and I view these videos over and over again of police officers who are afraid to use deadly force when even someone may be pointing a gun at them.
Yeah.
And this is the result of the years of anti-law enforcement ideology that has been pushed by the media, by politicians, and by people with the agendas of ending law enforcement as we know it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it started back in even the 80s, 90s, when some of these type people started infiltrating into the Department of Justice, and it's hard to fully describe, but it's a concentrated effort, and there's a lot of different organizations and people that are focused on it. But
there's millions of dollars being pumped into the anti-law enforcement, because it's actually anti-government. If you drill down, the George Soros is one of the most evil human beings on the face of the planet. and he's been exceedingly productive when it comes to what his agenda is, and that's to destroy America as we know it.
Yeah.
Well, what does he do? He focuses on law enforcement, and that has created much of the environment that we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, yeah, they're destroying masculinity. They're destroying law enforcement. They're destroying the central family. You know, those are the targets. And, you know, by destroying the fabric of society, ultimately it's going to destroy, you know, our very ability to have any levels of freedom. And to me,
that's the end goal.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Complete control, and, you know, just bringing in so that just a few at the very top of the government controls everything. That's their goal. And, you know, for any of us that believe in being able to walk down the street and say what we want to say and do what we want to do, and, you know, not have to show our papers every time we come by somebody that thinks we look the wrong way, then if you want to maintain those kind of freedoms, then we absolutely have to support our law enforcement, support our, you know, the family and organizations that promote and support those kind of ideals. And I think the Wounded Blue is right there. And, you know, I think organizations like you are absolutely essential to, you know, to the fabric of our society. So I appreciate doing, you know, what you do. I hope you know that.
I do. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on your program to get it out there and talk about it, and have your listeners get to know me a little bit and know my organization.
Yeah. Well, one last thing, and just really quick, I asked Betsy this on one of the times that she was on. So let's end this with a little lighter. So, you know, you're at Thanksgiving and somebody wants to hear the funniest story that ever happened to you while you were in law enforcement. You know, one of the most ridiculous things you've ever seen in your life.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to mind?
Well, I would have to say now it's human behavior never ceases to amaze me. So it's actually it was my first call by myself as a cop in Princeton, New Jersey. I'd gotten out of the academy. We didn't have a formal field training program. They put you with the senior officer who made the determination, okay, this guy's ready to go out on his own. And it was my first night by myself, and it was on graveyard shift. And I responded to a assist the ambulance for a man bleeding call. And it was on the campus of the Princeton University Graduate School. Literally, this is where the rocket scientists are. And it's 2:00 in the morning. I get the call, turn on my red lights and siren, even though there's not another car on the road, because I could, and come to a screeching halt in front of this residence, and it's where the graduate school students lived in different residences. And I pull up, and there's another unit already there with these two old cops. You know, they were old to me. They were probably, 40 years old, but to me, who's 19, they were old hairbag cops. One of them had a very pronounced Scottish brogue. And as I pull up and I jump out grab my first aid kit, and the first officer is there, and he says, "Laddie, this is your investigation." And I'm going, "Oh, cool." So I run in with my little first aid kit, and I walk into this apartment, and there's no furniture except for a picnic table and a bench. And on the picnic table, there's a pot, like a stew pot, and it's full of ice and blood. And there's a butcher knife on the table, and there's blood everywhere, blood all over the apartment. And I'm looking around, and in the corner is an Asian guy who's just standing there in a black overcoat. So I'm looking around, I'm trying to figure out what the situation is. And I said to the guy, I said, excuse me, are you bleeding? And he goes, yeah. I go, where? And he opened up his overcoat, and what was left of his penis was dangling by like a little strip of skin, and blood was pulsing out of it. And he's not showing any pain, any emotion. He's just standing there with bleeding to death. So remembering my first aid skills, I got a compress out and I said, here, apply direct pressure. Because I'm not touching that thing. And the ambulance gets there and they put him on the gurney, and I ride with him in the ambulance because I figure somebody did this to him and he may die, and I need to get a dying declaration so I can solve this crime. So we're riding in the ambulance. I said, so tell me what happened. And he had a very thick Asian accent. I'm not sure I can duplicate it, but he said, officer, I have sex problem. Masturbate too much. Interfere with my studies. The guy had failed a math test that day and blamed it on the fact that he was spanking his monkey too much. And instead of maybe moderating his schedule, he put that baby on the table and went whack.
Oh.
And he survived. Not only did he survive, but they sewed it back on. And I saw him for years later. And every time I saw him, I thought about that night. And I said to myself, I'm going to love this career.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to end it at that because I
Did I leave you speechless on that one?
You know what, Randy? I can just think of what some of my listeners, including my mother-in-law, is going to be saying based on that story.
I cleaned it up. I used all the appropriate language.
Oh yeah, you're anatomically correct. That's kudos to you. But yeah, all right. We are going to yeah. All right, Randy. Well, what? Tell you what. Next time I'm in Vegas, we'll go to your personal there.
My cigar lounge.
Your cigar shop. Your man cave there, and we can swap some other stories that. All right. Yeah. I don't want to say any more because I know I'm just going to get myself in trouble. So,
okay.
All right, brother. Hey, appreciate you. And
all right, man. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. We will talk to you later.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.